Welcome, everybody, to episode 11 of the Mindful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, as always, Jay Nickel. This week, we're going to do another gear shootout, and we are going to compare the Schnee's Beartooth boots against the Lathrop Sons Mountain Hunters. I've owned both these boots for an extensive period of time, and I went through the Lathrop Sons customized fitting process. So I definitely feel like I've compiled enough experience with these two boots that I can fairly put them head to head. And I think we're going to use this review as an opportunity to also cover some boot basics like sizing issues and different boots for different hunts. But ultimately, the goal will be to compare these two boots. As always, I appreciate all of the engagement. So if you can take a moment to like, comment, share, subscribe, it would be greatly appreciated. If you need to get a hold of me for whatever reasons, questions, comments, concerns, jay@mindfulhunter.com, Instagram, mindful_hunter, or on YouTube, mindful_hunter. Any of those will work equally well. So we're going to kick things off with a training discussion this week. And it's a very opportune time to have that discussion because I'm kind of just switched gears in a fairly significant way. So I am 4 weeks out from my goat hunt, which is going to be the last week of February. And I just switched up my plan a little under a week ago. Basically, I wanted to switch things up 5 weeks out. So the general context. So for the past 2 years, really, but very specifically for the last 3 months, I've been on a bulking cycle. I put on a significant amount of weight. The peak that I hit was 265 pounds as of the end of last week. And the focus has been solely on eating and lifting. That being said, I was doing weighted backpack hikes for probably the first 2/3 of that time. And then the weight and with all the supplements and all the food, it just gets to the point where you kind of start to break down a little bit on the weighted hikes. And I didn't want to beat my body up for no reason. So I switched to non-weighted hikes just to try and keep my cardio up and make sure I didn't lose too much of my, mountain conditioning. But ultimately the priority was lifting and putting on size. So once I hit that 5 weeks out from the hunt window, it was time to switch things up. My general overall principle with training for mountain hunts is that I try to be in shape all year, and then I look at using the last 4 to 5 weeks before a hunt to kind of peak for that hunt. Now, if there's extenuating circumstances or it's particularly challenging or, I had a hunt coming up and COVID was kicked off and the gyms were closed. So I had a lot more time to prep for that one and do a lot of the more typical mountain training that I do. But I really only need 4 to 5 weeks to kind of peak my conditioning for a hunt. I think too much longer than that, and you're just causing excess wear and tear on your body for no reason. So I'm in my 40s, so I like to be really judicious with my training and decide where I'm going to exert that energy. So with all that being said, what did I do to switch things up? So I brought all my supplements down to a more manageable level. I also took my calories and dropped those. I wouldn't say significantly. My goal is to maintain over the next 4 to 5 weeks. I will drop a little bit of water weight and drop a little bit of glycogen just because I've dropped some supplements and I've dropped some food. However, because I'm keeping my calories at maintenance, my actual mass will stay relatively the same. Ultimately, I don't think it's wise to diet going into a hunt or diet on a hunt. You see guys do this all the time who might be a little bit overweight and they're like, shit, I got a hunt in a month. I need to lose 20 pounds. And you're basically starving your body while you're trying to increase your performance. And those two goals are counterproductive. So if you drop your calories, your performance is going to drop. Simple math. For the most part, if you up your calories, your performance will increase to a point of diminishing returns. My goal is to keep calories at maintenance level. So this is basically where I can just flatline. Don't want to lose any weight, don't want to put on any weight, but I want enough calories that I can go out, train hard, and not lose any weight and not be in a point where I've run out of calories and I'm using from my stores in order to feed the workout, because that's not ideal for this type of training. So that's the diet. So basically I just knocked all my carb meals down by like 50 grams a piece. So for instance, most of my meals for the last little while have had 280 grams of carbs, like 280 grams of rice or 280 grams of potatoes. And I knocked those all back to 230. So I'll ride that out at 230 grams for the next week or so, keeping an eye on my weight. If my weight drops drastically, I'll put some carbs back in. And if my weight continues to go up, I will take some more carbs out, and I'll just kind of play with that until up to the hunt. So just to reiterate, I don't recommend dieting going into a hunt, and I don't recommend dieting on a hunt. I've already talked about the first one. The second one, I think, also bears discussion. I see guys do this where they'll like purposely take less food than is required so that they can like lose a couple pounds on a hunt. And I just think the ultimate priority needs to be performance, and that's got to come before everything. Go on a diet when you get home. And here's the deal, and I don't mean to sound like a dick. You're doing it because you have no willpower, and you don't have the ability to not eat like shit when you're back at home. So you're using the restrictive component of being out in the elements in order to facilitate losing a few pounds. And I wish more people would just recognize that's an inappropriate way to approach the situation. Anyways, rant aside. So that's diet. Drop carbs a little bit, kept protein the same, kept fat the same. Now, as far as training goes, so historically, I have been lifting 5 days a week, and then I've been doing cardio 1 day a week. Sometimes I do that on the same day. Normally, I do it on one of my off days, and then I make sure I get at least one true off day per week. So up until recently, my split has been chest and shoulders, primarily side and front delts, back and shoulders, primarily rear delts and traps, could fall under shoulders or back. So anyways, that all goes on back day. Then I do quads, then arms, and then hamstrings. And I facilitate my days off, so at least one of my days off falls in between quads and hamstrings. So I always have at least 2 days between quads and hamstrings. And some days it works, sometimes it works out where I'll actually get 3. So 5 day split, 5 days lifting, 1 day doing cardio is what I've been doing up till now. Now that I'm kicking it into hunt mode, I experimented with this last time I prepped for my elk hunt back in September, and it worked really well. The problem with training legs really hard is it actually impacts my ability to do weighted hikes. I can't do a weighted hike for 2 to 3 days after a big leg day. I just am physically incapable of doing it. So what I do now, last week, 2 weeks before the hunt, I just dropped legs entirely. And I found I lost no size. And in fact, I got some additional definition from the weighted backpack cardio. So I'm going to be even more aggressive this time, and I'm going to go 4 weeks out. So I'm going to stop doing legs altogether, which will basically bring my training regimen down to a 3-day split. So my goal will be next week to do 2 weighted backpack hikes. Now the hike that I do takes me an hour and a half. It's 4 miles. There's 1,000 feet in elevation gain, and there's only over 500 stairs. And according to my Apple Watch, I burn about 1,000 to 1,200 calories on this hike. It's fairly intense. I haven't tracked it with the Whoop yet because I actually lost my Whoop battery and I'm waiting for a new one in the mail. And I haven't actually done the weighted backpack hike since I bought the Whoop. I'll be interested to see what kind of strain figure I get from the Whoop on this hike. Anyways, it's an intense hike. Like when you're done, you're fucking done. So the goal is to do that 2 times next week and then 3 times the next 3 weeks in a row. I want to be doing this hike 3 times a week, and then I want to be lifting 3 times a week. And if anything gets sacrificed, I will sacrifice a day of lifting. I want to take a moment here and talk about like preservation of gains. As long as I'm moderately active and my diet doesn't go to shit, it really doesn't matter what I do for a month. People get super stressed out about losing size. You will feel somewhat deflated, but then when you get back into the gym and you up your calories again, like you puff right back up. It's not like that muscle actually goes anywhere. Now, if you just went and sat on your ass for 6 straight months, that's a different story. So I will say it again. As long as I'm moderately active and I don't eat like shit, I'm not concerned about losing any of my actual gains. So I need to prioritize hunt conditioning over everything else. Now that last week, there's another caveat. I might only do 2 maybe one hike. It depends. I want at least 4 to 5 days off of hiking of any kind before the first day of the hunt. I used to train right up until I left for a hunt, and I would find I would get to a hunt and my legs still weren't recovered from the training. And so you were kind of hamstringing yourself right out of the gate. So now I've realized there is more of a benefit to be realized from extending your kind of break before the hunt than there is deficit to be realized from missing that potentially one last training session. And here's the other thing. If you're bored or if you really just want to go train, go do arms or something. Because you can still go to the gym and break a sweat, but specifically stay off your legs. That's my theory anyways. Okay. So quick recap, drop some calories, drop some supplements. Goal is to stay at maintenance between now and leaving for the hunt, accounting for the extra caloric requirements from my additional cardio. Training, dropping back to 3 days a week lifting, potentially 2. Ditch lower body, only train upper body, and do weighted backpack hikes with 50 pounds at least 3 times per week for the next month. That's the goal. So I will keep you guys updated how that goes. I'll share some of the Whoop data once that gets going. And yeah, if you've got any questions about training for hunts, let me know. I've already gone on several rants about this podcast about, CrossFit style Metcon training for hunts and how I think it's utter and complete horse shit. And that if you like doing it, I support it 100%, but I see no functional need for it in hunting whatsoever. So I'm not going to waste time and kind of go through that again, even though I guess I sort of just did. But if you have any questions about why I approach training the way I do, please feel free to get in touch. One more thought that I'll close out with. My ultimate goal is just to replicate what I do when I'm hunting. So if I'm going to be walking around in the mountains with a heavy backpack on my back when I'm going hunting, then in my opinion, the best way to train for that is to do just that. And that's worked out really well for me in the past. So I'm going to continue doing it moving into the future. All right, time for this week's Gear Corner. Now, we don't have a piece of hunting gear per se this week. We have a piece of gear that I use to help me film, and not even necessarily just on hunts, but in like doing the podcast and some other stuff. So I don't know, for those of you who are watching this right now, I'm holding it up. The piece of gear that we're talking about is the Tentacle Track E, which is essentially a portable lav mic. A lav mic is essentially any mic that you wear on your collar. Like you see them all the time with like the little black kind of puffy windscreen. You see people wear them during interviews and a bunch of other situations. Now, what makes the Track E particularly interesting? There's a few things that makes it interesting, but the single most kind of important thing that made it so remarkable that I kind of went out and bought it is that it uses 32-bit floating point technology. So this might not mean a whole lot to some of you, but I want you to think about it like this. When you are recording sound levels, you're always trying to optimize your signal to noise ratio. So if you record at maximum gain, you will definitely have enough signal. You will record your voice, but it's likely going to be hot. You're probably going to be clipping. It's going to be going into the red and you're going to be losing information. Also, you're going to pick up all the ambient noise that is in the area. So you're going to pick up a lot of noise with your signal as well. Well, then one might ask, well, why not just turn your gain down so that your signal's not as hot? And that way you record less noise. It's a good point, and often that's what you should do. However, when you turn the gain down, you're also going to be collecting less signal. Now, in normal environments, this isn't a big deal because somebody can be monitoring the audio. Like, for instance, right now I have a little Zoom recorder that I kind of keep just out of frame, and I can actually look at it in the corner of my eye and I can see where the levels are hitting. And I'm like between -6 and kind of -3 dB. So it's a very sweet spot, makes for great editing. I still have a lot of what you would call headroom, so I can push the mix a little bit. I'm not clipping. but it's also quiet enough that I don't pick up a lot of the ambient noise in the house. Now, when I was doing the tent podcast last week, I had to mic myself. But when you're mic'd yourself, you can't monitor audio at the same time. The really intense, and I don't even understand the technology, a thing about 32-bit floating point technology is that it has kind of infinite headroom and an infinite noise floor, if that makes any sense. But essentially, I never have to worry that my mic is going to be too hot. I also never have to worry that my mic is going to be too quiet, because with 32-bit, no matter how loud it is or how quiet it is, it would never actually clip. And again, I don't even comprehend the mathematics of how this is possible, because I was in music for a long time even before I got into hunting. I had a fairly significant career in the music industry, and I was always an analog guy. So you were dealing with like hard limits. Like when things went red, the data was gone. Like there was no way of recovering that. So this kind of trips my mind out. They're not cheap. It's about $400. I was super impressed with the audio quality I got out of that tent podcast. I clipped it to my belt and I just totally didn't even think about it. It's USB charged, so you never have to worry about batteries. I think there's a 64 gig SD card in there, so you could probably record like 40 or 50 hours of audio. The audio quality was superb. The construction quality is superb. It pairs with your iPhone, so I can actually open up the iPhone and verify, yeah, it's recording. It's got LED meter right on the hardware device itself. So if you didn't have a phone, you can pair multiple versions of these and have them run off the same time code. I'm not going to get into the details of what time code is. It's basically when you're in a multiple camera, multiple audio device setting, like a professional movie recording or something, everything is synced to time code. And that's not really like the time of day. It's a little bit different than that, but you could use that as an analogy and it would work. And that way, when you bring everything into post, you don't have to like manually synchronize everything. You just import your time code into the timeline. And then when you drop data in, it just syncs up to the time code automatically. So you could I was actually thinking, if I ever did a big group hunt and we were going to do a couple podcasts, I wouldn't even bother with the big Zoom and a bunch of like big microphones and headsets. I would just bring 4 or 5 of these Tentacle Track E's. I wouldn't have to ever worry about people clipping. I wouldn't have to monitor sound, and we could just record a podcast, and I would sync them all later in post. So a bit nerdy for you hunting, for just the purebred hunting guys. You probably don't have a spot for it in your arsenal, but for you guys who are doing any type of like film work, super cool device. If you want a more detailed breakdown on it, and this is how I found out about it, look up a YouTube channel called Gerald Undone. I think he is undisputedly the kind of best kind of video audio nerd on YouTube, and he's Canadian. Super smart guy, and kind of gets into more the nitty gritty about why the Track E is so cool. And he's a very critical reviewer, and he was kind of, fanboying over this thing as well. So that was what gave me the confidence to go pull the trigger on it. So anyways, if you're looking for a lav mic, Tentacle Track E, super high quality, highly recommend it. All right, let's get into the nuts and bolts of the podcast today, the actual boot review. So as usual, I'm going to give a bit of my background and why I consider myself to have a credible voice in this space. So I'm 42 now. I did my first year of tree planting the summer I was 22. So you could arguably say I've been wearing boots in fairly extreme mountain conditions for the last 20 years. And I've probably gone through more than 20 pairs of boots, because I would have been buying multiple boots per year, because I would have had work boots, which in BC, you have to have corks. I would have been buying hiking boots. And so let's say I've probably had 30 pairs of boots over those 20 years. And once I stopped tree planting I got into engineering, and that also required kind of mountain style boots. Again, legally you have to wear corks. And if you don't know what corks are, they're basically spikes on the bottom of your boot. The newer ones are kind of ceramic tipped. They're not just sharp stainless steel. And it helps you walk on logs and just not slip when you're in the woods. I always thought it kind of funny that nobody ever wears them hunting, because some of the places we go, they would be really handy. But also, if you come across like anything hard, like any type of rock or gravel or conglomerate, it's insanely loud to walk on corks. So that I'm assuming that's why hunters have never used them. So I've worn a lot of boots, and I've worn a lot of boots in different mountain environments. And I think tree planting was kind of the best testing grounds for boots, because you were just basically beating the shit out of them from day one. I never had a pair of boots last more than a single season. Getting a full season out of a pair of boots without having to duct tape the shit out of them was basically a success. I've done everything from wearing like pretty hardcore mountaineering boots to taking more like speed hiking boots. And I even had my hiking boots recorked. So I took like a pair of Solomons, had the soles shaved off and a cork plate installed, used that for tree planting one year. Those were super cool boots. I've used a lot of single layer leather boots, like Viber corks, which is like, they're kind of like a pack boot. Like they have a leather upper and a rubber bottom, and then corks on the bottom of that. That's kind of like my go-to. And then normally with a felt liner, that's kind of my go-to work boot on the coast. That's what I like the best. I don't like the orange pumpkin boots, but that's just my taste. So one other thing to keep in mind as far as my experience with boots, I have Morton's Neuroma in my right foot. So basically, between my third and fourth metatarsal, I have an inflamed nerve. And it's just like a genetic oddity. They don't really know what the cause is of it. My mom had it, my grandma had it, my brother had it. So I think you just have a genetic predisposition. And then if you spend too much time on your feet, it gets inflamed. About 4 or 5 years ago, it got to the point where I couldn't even hike anymore. I could barely walk for more than 5 minutes. I couldn't wear dress shoes. It was like basically like somebody was sticking a hot poker in between my toes. And if I walked for too long and it got too inflamed, I wouldn't be able to think straight. It would throb so painfully that the only thing I could do is like take some Advil and just lay down and hope that it would kind of clear up. I went through a shit ton of procedures kind of over a 2-year period because I just got sick of it, and I was doing pretty well professionally. So I had some money, and I had a surgery that they went in, they cut one of the tendons attached to it, hoping to give it more room. Then I went back in and had a second surgery where they actually cut out the nerve. Then I went down to a specialty clinic in Boston, and I got cryoablation. Cryoablation is basically where they take these ice crystals on the end of needles, insert them into your foot, and basically drag the ice crystals across the nerve ending, killing the nerve. That's what ablation means, is like destroying the nerve so it couldn't send pain signals anymore. And then what I also did at that clinic is I got stem cells injected into my foot, my own stem cells. So I actually had to go in one day. They drilled into my my pelvis into my back by my spine, pulled out bone marrow from my pelvis, spun the bone marrow, pulled the stem cells out of the bone marrow, and then injected them into my foot. That same trip, I also got PRP, platelet-rich plasma. So I got the cryoablation, I got the PRP, and the PRP, they basically withdraw blood from your body, spin it, capture all the platelets, and then inject that, because they're like the super healers of the blood, inject that into the target area. And I got the stem cells. The whole thing cost me like 10 grand US. It was fucking crazy. And I basically flew to Boston. They beat the shit out of me for 2 days. And then I flew back home. And I got all that stuff done, and it was still pretty bad. Like, it was tolerable, but I got to be honest with you, I think it just took a little while for it to settle out. So now that it's been a couple of years from all those procedures, I'd say it's about 10% as painful as it used to be. Like, I can really and now that I know that I'm not doing any like physical damage to my body and it's just a pissed off nerve that's sending pain signals, I just beat the fuck out of it and deal with the pain. That being said, boots have always been kind of crucial to me, because the fit of a boot will not only be somewhat uncomfortable to potentially produce hot spots, but if it flares up my neuroma, I'm cooked. So I'm particularly sensitive to boot sizings. Again, Not so much now, but I definitely was previously. I've got a little bit more leeway now. What I discovered was the wide toe box. So I really like, if you've ever seen Ultras, they have this, like, they call it the natural toe box. It's like gives your toes room to splay. And I've kind of learned over the years now from using toe boxes like that, I think that's how all toe boxes should be designed. You need more room for your feet than you think you need. Because your feet are meant to act as like suspension. Like the arch is like having a shock absorber in your foot, and the way your toes splay out help dissipate impact when your foot hits the ground. And when you start cramming your foot into a boot, you're basically negating all the natural kind of shock absorption properties of your foot. And you're kind of just walking around on two hard stumps. All that being said, keep that in mind, because it did make me very sensitive to boot sizing, and I got very picky, and I started doing a shit ton of research. It's one of the reasons why I feel comfortable talking about this on the podcast, because I've worn basically everything under the sun, and I feel like I've put it through its paces. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is sizing. You have to try a boot on. I get really frustrated when I see all these people asking on Q&As, what's the best boot? The best boot is the boot that fits you the best. So you have to try boots on to know how they're going to conform to your foot. Even if you don't live next to major stores, unless they're custom boots, there are no boot manufacturers or boot retailers that won't accept boots being returned. I do it all the time. I will even order the same boot in two different sizes. Or I'll order two comparable boots in what size I know is going to fit, or whatever. Like, I do it all the time. And I get them, I wear them around the house for an hour, and I'm like, yep, I like these ones. Nope, I don't like these ones. Sometimes you can have them in-store delivered, and it saves you the return charges. I do that at Mech all the time. You can do the same thing at REI. Go on. I was comparing the La Sportiva Nepal GTXs to the Scarpa Mont Blanc Pros, and by all accounts, the Mont Blancs should have been wider based on reviews, based on technical specifications. These are like $600-700 boots. I ordered them both into MEC. I went in and tried them on, and the La Sportivas were way wider than the Mont Blancs, and they were also way more comfortable. And that you're only going to know that shit by trying them on. So stop asking people what the best boot is, start ordering a shit ton of boots, and just try them on and see what fits your foot the best. I said this before, but I think most people are in boots that are too small. I used to be under the impression that a mountain boot should compress your foot. You shouldn't have any play, because that's how you get hot spots, and you had more stability if your foot wasn't sliding around in the boot. The more research I've done and the more professionals in the industry that I've talked to, I've discovered it was a very incorrect assumption that I had. And in fact, you should have, I urge people to size up half a size, especially by the time you put on like a heavy duty hiking sock. I want at least, a quarter to a half an inch or more room between my toe, at least half an inch between your toe and the end of the boot, potentially even 3/4 of an inch, depending on how the boot fits. And if you can, I look for boots that you can tighten on the instep really aggressively, because that is going to suck your heel into the heel pocket, but it's going to leave room for your toes to splay out. And then when you're walking downhill, you're not going to get that thing where the front of your toes slam into the end of your boots. I've had multiple times when I got home from hunts, a week later, one of my nails turned black and fell off. And the reason that happens is that the boots are too small. So that's another test I like to do. I will put my boot on, I will cinch it up good and tight, and then I will kick the floor with my toe. Or I'll walk up to my stairs and I'll kick the facing of one of the stairs with my toe. And if my toe slams into the end of the boot when I kick the stair, the boot is not big enough. I need a little bit more room up there. This is something else that I only discovered this year. Your insole should not even be tight in your boot. The recommendation is to have 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch play in your insole, so that your insole actually has a little bit of room to move around within your boot. That's also going to allow the boot to swell and for things to not get overly cramped in there. So now that I've started adjusting all of my insoles to give it that little bit of wiggle room and started wearing boots that fit me properly, the vast majority of my foot problems have gone away. So those are two big tips that, I would like you to keep in mind moving forward. Now, as far as boots that I've owned from different manufacturers, I've owned Hanvogs, Ultras, which are more like a trail running shoe, but I actually did this big comparison. That's a video you can go watch on my channel too. I looked at comparing the Ultras as a hunting boot, and I used them for a season down in Arizona. There's some definite benefits to do that. So Hanvog, Ultra, Solomon, Morel, Lathrop Sons, Schnee's, La Sportiva. I'm sure there's a couple other in there, but that's the vast majority of them that I've owned. And I've owned several different boots from each of those kind of manufacturers. So let's start talking about what type of different boots there are and what type of different situations call for which boot. I will say I prefer leather boots to synthetic boots for a couple of reasons. And I will open up by saying I might just be biased because I'm a bit old school and I like the look and feel of leather boots, and I just trust leather. I think there are some more advanced qualities in some of the synthetic fibers and textiles that they use, but I still believe that for boots overall, over the long run, leather is a superior material. But that's not something, I do think that's partially opinion. It's not all fact. So if you're a synthetic boot guy, I'm not going to tell you to stop wearing synthetic boots, because if that's what you feel does the trick for your particular hunting style, then rock out. There's lots of great synthetic boots. But I will say, my recommendations for the most part are going to fixate on leather boots because I prefer them. Now, why do I prefer them? One, I find they conform better to my foot after time. Once you put 50 or 100 miles on a pair of leather boots, get them wet and let them dry a couple times, especially while your foot is inside them. They just turn into a glove, man. They just mold around your foot and they're the way they're supposed to be. One caveat to that is once you have a pair of leather boots warmed up, if you take them off for whatever reason, like to adjust your socks or let something dry out and put them back on while they're still warm and maybe a little bit moist, you do have to be careful tightening them up because you can really crank on them after that. So I only normally give them like an 80% tug. If I'm like, say I stop for lunch, I let my feet air out. When I put my boots back on, I won't give them that same kind of yank that I do when I'm tightening them up at the truck. The other lacing tip I will give you, don't focus on tightening the laces above your toes. I mentioned this earlier. Focus on tightening the laces at the instep. You will notice a lot of the new boots have a lace lock right at the instep. That's exactly what this is for. Tightening the laces across your toes is going to compress your foot, and it's going to, again, negate the shock absorption qualities of the foot itself. Tightening it at the instep is going to just suck that heel back into the heel pocket, and it's still going to allow the mechanics of the foot to operate correctly. So that's another big one that I think is important to note. I also believe that leather boots are more water repellent over the long run when treated correctly. There's some caveats to that, but using the right products at the right time, at the right frequency, I think you're going to get a better water repellent product long-term out of a pair of leather boots. I also tend to prefer higher boots, like 8 to 10 inch uppers. And I find for some reason, I don't know why, most synthetic boots kind of just only run to 6 inches. I like them higher for creek crossings. I find if you have a good pair of boots, they're laced up good and tight, and you're not dawdling across the stream, I can go in over my ankle all day and not get wet feet or just moderately damp. As soon as you go in over the lip of the cuff, you're fucked. Even if it doesn't surge right in, your whole pant leg and sock is going to get soaked, and then that's going to wick down into your boot. I like higher cuffs on my boots, and I find traditionally leather boots tend to have higher cuffs. Yeah, that's about it as far as why I like leather boots more. And again, I will say as a disclaimer, it could also be partially biased. Like I like the traditional feel of a good leather boot. I like the way they smell, and maybe not after you wear them too long, but I like putting conditioning on them. I like waterproofing them. I just like gear that you can like use and take care of and last a really long time. So I prefer leather boots. Okay, let's get into a little bit of like boots 101. So they run the gamut from like a trail runner to a mountaineering boot, and then everything in between. So a trail runner would literally be like a sneaker that may or may not be waterproof, would probably have a very thick lugged sole. It's going to be hyper flexible, like a piece of paper. And it's going to be used for people who run on trails. I have used them for hunting. I do know people who use them for hunting. I don't think they're ideal for hunting. And as we get into the rest of this podcast, you're going to find out why. All the way on the other end of the spectrum, we're going to have like a mountaineering boot, which would be like a Koflatch or the high-end Scarpas. And I can't remember the name of the last Sportivas. Yeah, but they would have a plastic shell. They're going to be like wearing a 2x4. They're basically like a brick. They're like a ski boot. The super high-end mountaineering boots are almost identical to ski boots, except the angle of your ankle flexion is going to be a little bit reduced, but they're going to literally be that rigid, that hard. They're meant for like climbing Everest and shit. Now, if we come one notch down from there, I would have what we call in our industry mountaineering boots. That's a sheep boot. That's going to be like a Schnee's Granite or a La Sportiva Nepal or a Scarpa Mont Blanc. Like these are going to be extremely rigid boots. Let's use a scale of 1 to 4 because that's what Schnee's uses and I really like their scale. A 4 is going to be like that sheep mountaineering boot. And a 1 or even a 0 would be a trail runner. Let's say a 0 is a trail runner and a 1 would be like a hyper flexible Solomon hiking boot, just a little bit more rigid than that trail runner. So once we come down from the sheep boot, now we're getting into the kind of middle of the road. This would be like the Lathrop Sons Mountain Hunter. So we're talking the 2 and 3 territory. This is going to be the Schnee's, Beartooth. Okay, so once we get past our 2s and 3s, now we're down in the 1s. This is going to be like a Schnee's Timberline. I think they're Kestrel. Most of the Solomon hiking boots, like these are hyper flexible. So right out of the gate, for me personally, I don't roll with the 1s. Here's why. No matter how ideal the hunting circumstance, there's a chance I'm coming out fully loaded. Unless it was like a scouting trip and there was no possibility of me bringing out an animal. If I'm coming out with in excess of 100 pounds on my back, for your own safety, you should have a somewhat stiff boot. This is where people's arguments about the lighter boots tend to break down for me. I don't argue that you can get around in the woods safely and efficiently with a more flexible shoe. I will, however, argue quite aggressively that you cannot get out of the mountains with the majority of an animal on your back without a somewhat stiff-soled boot, like with a stiff shank in it, like a number 2 and up. So then the question you need to ask yourself is, what kind of terrain am I? Because really the question to me for the vast majority of hunters is, do I want to be in a 2, 3, or a 4? I don't personally believe there's any place for 1s in hunting. So the variables that I'm going to take into account when I'm deciding that are going to be how heavy is my pack and for how long, okay? So if I'm going in light but could come out heavy, then that's going to give me more flexibility. If I'm going in heavy and might come out heavy, the going in light and coming out heavy is like an elk bivvy hunt. You're only going in for 2 to 4 days at a time. You're going to regroup at the truck and keep going back in. You could get away with a 2 in that situation because the only time you're going to be really heavy is when you're coming out loaded. Having the more mobility and agility, especially if you're going to be like running around trying to make plays on bugling bulls, I think a 2 is a great boot, like the something in line with the Mountain Hunter or the Beartooth. And we'll get into it later, but I think the Mountain Hunter is more of like a 3 and the Beartooth is more of like a 2. I think those 2s and 3s are perfectly acceptable for elk hunting, mule deer hunting, all that kind of stuff. The caveat is, if you're going in for a 12-day mule hunt and you're carrying a 70-pound pack, then I would say you probably want to get up into the 3s and 4s, because now you're going to be putting, I mean, who knows, man, maybe you're hiking in 10, 15, 20 miles, and maybe you're going to hike another 5 miles a day, looking for the deer with potentially your entire camp on your back. So the first variable that we want to look at, just to recap here, is weight. So it's not only the amount of weight, but how long that weight might be on your back. Okay. Second variable is terrain. And more importantly, this is a bit of a nuance. I don't really care about going up and down. I feel pretty confident going up and down in even slightly more flexible boots. Where you're going to run into problems is the side hills. We are not designed particularly well to walk on side hills for long periods of time. And I find it's an area that most people neglect when they train. It's kind of nice. The trail that I hike has this huge section at the top where you're basically walking across this like grassy slope that's on like maybe a 30-degree pitch, and you have to side hill it the whole way. And my calves are normally lit up by the time I get to the opposing side. I'll even do it back and forth a couple times every now and then just to like really drill my side hilling. So if there's going to be an extensive amount of side hilling, for example, a sheep hunt in particular, that's when you want to be up in the neighborhood of the 4s. So I'm leaving on this goat hunt in 4 weeks, and then I have a big sheep hunt this summer. I'm going to be using the La Sportiva Nepals. I'm going to get into that more in a bit, but they are absolutely a 4. They are that mountaineering sheep boot. So that to me is like, that's how you start filtering this problem. What boot should I be in? How much weight am I going to be carrying? How long am I going to be carrying it for? And how aggressive is the terrain? Once you've answered those questions, then you can start saying, okay, that's the stiffness I want. What boots exist from which manufacturers that I trust that fulfill this qualification? And the problem is most people go about it ass backwards. They're like, oh, Crispies in everybody's fucking YouTube videos, so I'm going to go buy Crispies. And then they just buy the Crispies that they think work for them. And it's like, you're going about it backwards. First decide what you want the boot to do for you. Then go look at what manufacturers build a boot that fulfills those qualifications for you. I will say, much like rain gear, we can have a good, better, best. And we don't all have budgets to have the best for every hunt. If you can only buy one pair of boots, buy a pair of boots in that 2 to 3 range, because it's not like you're not going to be able to go on a sheep hunt. And it's not like you're not going to be able to do like a more, sure-footed, quick, agile elk hunt. You'll be able to do both. You're not going to die. Best case scenario, you would have different boots for each hunt because they're pretty drastically different hunts. But I would say the 2 to 3 is like your all-arounder, that boot in the middle of the road, pretty stiff, not too stiff, decently high cuff. You're going to survive. I believe aftermarket insoles are a must. There's a company called Sole, S-O-L-E. The best ones they make, in my opinion, are the performance medium and the active medium. So they sell 3 widths of insoles: thin, medium, and thick. I've tried all 3. I use the thins in my dress shoes and my Blundstones because I want more room in the toe box, and I'm not doing like super aggressive walking in either of those. I've tried the thicks, but they eat up too much room in the toe box and they squish my foot. So I've landed on the mediums, and I use the actives and the performance. To be honest, they're fairly identical. I'd probably give the performances the slight edge because the actives have a cork bottom, and I find they're not as rigid and they don't hold their shape for as long as the performances do. Also, for anyone who has metatarsal issues or Morton's Neuroma or any other similar condition, they sell met pads installed on both of those. So it's basically like this little hump that helps splay out the metatarsals of your foot more effectively. I really want to try sheep feet. Sheep feet still don't ship to Canada, which sucks. And because of COVID, I would normally just drive across the border, order them, drive across, pick them up, mold them, send them back, do that. But I can't do that right now because of COVID. So I literally don't even have a way to get sheep feet into Canada to do the molds and then send them back. But I'm hoping at some point in the future, these border restrictions are going to lift and I'll be able to order a pair of sheep feet, and I'll do a very thorough review once I get that opportunity. Okay, let's talk about water treatment options here. And I wanted to find the difference between a single layer leather boot and like a dual layer or a complex layered leather boot. A single layer boot would be like those ones I was saying, like the Vibergs, or like a pack boot is another really good example, like from Schnee's, where it's literally just a hunk of nubuck leather. It's normally like a couple mils thick. In those cases, I like to use some type of wax. So I will either use Snow Seal or Obenhaus LP paste, because you don't have to worry about Gore-Tex or anything else. So that's what I like to use for those boots. Now, in a complex boot where there's Gore-Tex layers involved, I prefer Nick Wax. They make a couple of different products depending on the boot, but they're normally like this like pasty kind of wax material, and they will waterproof your boot without compromising the Gore-Tex layers. So that's what I recommend for more complex boots. Okay, now that we have all that out of the way, let's start with the Lathrop Sons. So this is a particularly traditional kind of leather boot. It uses E-vent instead of Gore-Tex. I would say it's maybe like an 8-inch upper. It really drops down towards the heel, which is a little bit unfortunate. One nice thing about these boots is that it has a particularly high rand. And so the rand is the rubber layer that goes around the outside kind of edge of the leather part of the boot and kind of contacts into the sole, which is quite nice. It's very firm rand. I've used these boots on 3 mountain hunts, and I broke them in with about 50 to 75 miles of hiking. So I've done well over a couple hundred miles in these boots. The construction quality is quite high. I found the waterproof component quite acceptable. They've got a Vibram sole, which is quite nice. You're going to be hard pressed to find a high-end boot these days that doesn't use Vibram soles. That's kind of like a deal breaker for me if you don't have a Vibram sole. One nice thing about all Vibram soles is they're replaceable. So if you had some kind of manufacturer defect, or if you just wore the shit out of your boots, the leather uppers tend to last longer than the rubber bottoms. So you could go have them resoled and you'd have essentially a new pair of boots. The roller hardware on the Lathrops is quite nice. Now, they do not have a locking instep lacing mechanism, which is like a little bit of a drawback for them. But let's say I was just going to evaluate this boot just on what I said just now. I would give it like a 7.5 out of 10. It's going to get a bit of a deduction because I don't like, it doesn't have a locking instep lacing mechanism. I don't like that this drops back here on the calf. There's like almost a 2-inch difference or an 1.5 inch difference. And so that's where water is going to scoot in right there when I'm crossing creeks, especially because you tend to kick up water with the toe of your rear foot, and it's going to splash in the back of my leg and kind of go right in there. So there's a couple elements of the construction of the boot. It's a fairly stiff boot. The thing about the 3, I would put this as a 3 out of 4. And the thing I don't really like about 3s is like, you're getting borderline sheep stiff, which is like only really needed on sheepy kind of hunts. That's why I tend to either go in a 2 or be in a 4. Like if I was going to have 2 pairs of boots, I'd have a 2 and a 4, because then you're covered for everything. And so again, it's like a little too stiff to be your just run-of-the-mill elk boot, but then not stiff enough to be like a true dyed-in-the-wool sheep boot. So as far as the boot itself, yeah, let's say 7.5 out of 10. It is what it is. Now let's talk about the customized fitting process. So here's how things work with Lathrop & Sons. You tell them you want a pair of boots and they ship you this package. Inside this package, there's like these little pressure sheets. Think of like those carbon copy sheets you used to write on and the carbon would go through the next layer. It's like that, but pressure transfers the carbon. So you basically use 3 of these sheets. You could do the same process 3 times. You step on it. It basically shows where the weight is distributed on your foot. You trace your foot. You take some pictures of your foot. and then you send it in. And their sales pitch is they then customize the boots based on this information. Not only do they customize the boots, they have these insoles called Synergy footbeds, which are kind of like these jelly, floppy, soft insoles. I've never really seen anything else like them. They customize the footbeds, they customize the boots, they tell you they kind of build you a custom boot, and they send it back to you. Before I get into this, I just want to say I've talked with, I'm pretty sure it was Steve, extensively for probably multiple hours during this whole process. Everybody at Lathrop Sons seems to be really nice. So I don't want my kind of review of this process to think that like I don't like the guys at Lathrop or I don't like Lathrop as a company. I'm willing to admit that maybe this was just my one-off experience, but like just to fucking cut to the chase, the boots fit like shit. Like just not good. I had multiple hot spots. I told him about my Neuroma issue. I told him I wanted a wide toe box. He looked at my printouts. He said, nope, you shouldn't be in a toe box. You shouldn't be in a wide box. You should be in a regular narrow box. They built the boots. They sent them to me. I wore them for like half an hour. The tops of both of my pinky toes were like rubbing. Like, what a weird thing to have rubbing. Like, I've never had this rub in any other boot I've ever owned. I used these for 10 days on an elk hunt, and I got like a quarter size, like deep blister. Yeah, I was taping it up every day. I did everything I could. I finished the hunt and I did what I did. They beat the shit out of my feet. They inflamed my neuroma instantly. Like just from putting the boot on, my feet started to ache. It was garbage, man. I don't know how else to say it. It was shit. I sent them back. I took pictures of the areas, drew circles. I'm like, too tight here. Don't like this. This needs to be loose. Like very clear instructions. They were super nice. They took the boots back. They didn't charge me any more money. They apparently did something to the boots and they shipped the boots back and the boots fit identical. Then nothing changed whatsoever. Here's the kick in the nuts. By the time you include everything, the cost of the boots, the cost of the footbeds, the cost of the fitting, the cost of the shipping and all that, $1,200 I spent on this pair of boots and they fit my feet like shit. And this is after already sending them back once. So after sending them back once, I was like, there's no point in sending them back. I'm like, I'm just going to call it a loss. I didn't understand how they could possibly get these boots to fit my feet anyways. And that's why I was so strenuous at the beginning. Like you have to try boots on. And here's the other thing. I'm not sure how they're custom fitting boots to your feet when they only understand like one dimension. Like your foot is a 3D object. And without any data about the volume of your foot or where your toes are, or like without some kind of 3D scan of the foot, how is it not marketing hype that they're custom building a boot for your foot? The only thing they know is like where the pressure is on the bottom. And I kept asking them like time and time again, can you tell me like what's custom about these boots? Like what exactly did you do to this boot that makes it different than if I just went on your site and like just bought a pair of boots over the counter? I was never able to get a straight answer. So, I mean, I'm just going to be really straight up and I don't like to throw people under the bus, but it was a really shitty process. It cost a shitload of money and I got a really shitty boot at the end of the day. And I'm not happy. It was a really negative experience. So I do not recommend going through this whole process. I think it's a bit of smoke and mirrors, to be completely honest with you. And the Synergy footbeds are garbage. They're like these little floppy rubber things that like don't offer any type of arch support. They don't have a heel cup to keep your heel sucked back into the boot. Like I've tried to use them in other boots and they were just shit. Like, anyways, I'm kind of going off the deep end now and I'm sorry. I don't mean to be like completely rude. I'm sure they're good guys, but for my foot, and this is what's so important, other guys might buy these things and they fit like a dream. And I will say they are the identical price of the Beartooth, which we're going to get into shortly. They're both $450 US over the counter. So if I hadn't have done any of the sizing stuff and spent the other $750 on their custom boot program, I would be comparing head to head And I would just say that the Beartooths fit my feet better. And then I wouldn't be going, what pissed me off about this process is they give you this song and dance about how custom their boots are. And then it's like, but they don't fit my feet, man. And I've sent them back already a second time. Like, I don't understand what else. Anyways, kind of smelled like bullshit to me. So that's where we're at with the Lathrop Sons. On the actual construction and the quality of the boot, I'm going to give it like a 7.5. On the quality of the experience and then the fitment and the final, wearing experience of the boot, I'm giving it a 2. I think they're shit, and I wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole. But maybe you had them and you loved them, and that's totally cool. Moving on, let's get into the Beartooths. One last point on the Lathrop Sons is that the pair of boots themselves in size 14 that I wear are 4.75 pounds. That's with no insoles and nothing inside them. And before I forget, the Beartooths in size 14 with nothing inside them are 4.25 pounds. So a pair of Beartooths are a half a pound lighter than a pair of Mountain Hunters from Lathrop Sons. So each boot is a quarter pound lighter. So that's one last data point that I wanted to include. All right, let's get into the Beartooth. This is essentially, this is my kind of boot, man. Like, it's a leather boot. It's got a nice solid, I don't know if it's like a 9-inch upper, lots of coverage area. Water doesn't go down into it. The rolling hardware on the lacing system is fantastic. And unlike the Lathrops, these do have a locking instep mechanism. So essentially, when you reef on these and cross them, it clips this little clip down and applies enough pressure to the lace that the lace can't slide backwards. So you can kind of let go of the laces and they just stay there, which then allows you to do up the calves. You can do the toes slightly looser, crank down on the instep, and do your calves slightly looser. And that gives you room for your foot to like move and breathe within the boot, but using the leverage force of that instep sucks your heel back into the heel cup of the insole. So that is a great point for me. Now, the one thing in the design, I do tend to prefer single leather boots, like single piece or as few elements of stitching as possible on leather boots. And there's basically like 3 main components to this one, which is like one more than I would like traditionally, but I've worn the shit out of these boots and there's no failure has occurred. All the stitching is held up and I haven't had to worry about it. And I haven't noticed, because I treat them quite well, I haven't really noticed any leakage coming in through the seams. Again, this is a 2 in stiffness. So I would say that it's slightly less stiff than the Lathrop Sons. It's got a nice tongue on it that kind of fits really well. The rand is not as high, and I also would say it's not quite as thick. I would say the Lathrop Sons, it kind of gets an additional point over the Schnees in the rand, in that it's slightly higher quality and it's slightly bigger. Vibram sole, just like on this. I'm pretty sure Schnee's uses Sympatex and Lathrop Sons uses Event. Both of these are like versions of Gore-Tex made by different companies. So all you need to understand is it's like a waterproof, breathable layer in your boot. Much like I covered on the rain gear episode, though, nothing is ever going to be truly waterproof and breathable. There's always going to be an element of compromise there. But I would say both boots are equal in that regard, like decently waterproof. Again, I will treat these with Nick Wax before every major hunt. And then at the end of the season, I use a leather conditioner. And it's one I buy right from Schnee's. It's kind of like orange in color. I can't remember what it might just be called leather conditioner. And I will put that on the leather before I put them in a storage tub for the winter and stick them away. And then when I get them back out, because I'm normally doing so much training and trail hiking, that kind of breaks them in and wears off all that conditioner. And then normally by the time I go on my first hunt of the season, I will be going, I'm ready to put some waterproof on them. They sell these in a wide. So here's the thing. One boot as a customized fitting process. The other boot I bought directly off the shelf. The customized fitting boot feels like shit. I knew I needed a wide toe box. I bought the wide version. I bought it in size 14. These things fit magnificently from day one. Now, I'm not going to say they didn't take time to break in. Any good boot should take time to break in. If there is a 0 break-in period, it's because the boots are too weak. They're too flexible and they're too light. That's why they're comfortable. That's why you don't have to break in sneakers. Any boot that is offering some form of decent support will need a break-in period. And normally the more support, the deeper the break-in period. I'm at like 75 miles break-in period with the La Sportiva, and it's only the last 10 or 20 miles that like I'm starting to fall in love with those mountaineering boots to the point I might even elk hunt in those things, man. Like they are so stable. They're not particularly heavy. They're leather as well. They look like they're synthetic because they're like bright neon yellow and spaceship colors, but that's a leather boot, man. There's some synthetic components on it, but it's a leather boot. The La Sportiva is blowing my mind. Now, it's a $600 boot. It exists in a whole different realm from these two boots that we're comparing as far as practicality, and most people would hate them. The first 50 miles, I hated them. My feet were sore. They felt really clunky, like it was just terrible. But now that I've broken them in appropriately, like in the mountains, doing mountain hiking with 50 pounds on my back, that's the other thing you need to realize. The stiffer the boot, the better it's going to operate with weight on your back. Think about the suspension of a truck. You are meant to have weight in a truck for the suspension to work properly. When you don't have any weight in a truck, the suspension is very jarring, and that's just like a stiff boot. They work much better the more weight you put on your back. Anyways, I digress. Back to the Beartooths. Leather's really high quality. Fitment is really high quality. The insoles are garbage. They're these little thin felt things. So again, for day one, rip those out, put the soles in, S-O-L-E. The Rand is decent quality. I would give these things a 9 out of 10 just on like fitment and build construction. I also like that they're a little bit lighter. They're $450, same price as the Lathrop and Sons are over the counter without the custom fitment process. I mean, I hate to sound like I'm blowing smoke up somebody's ass, but like in my opinion, if I was just going to own one boot from now until the end of my days, it would probably be these Beartooths. There's still some other boots that Schnee's makes that I would like to try. I'm also like a pretty diehard Schnee's guy at this point in time, and that's only because I now own a couple of their products and they've never let me down. I now own their pack boots and these, and I love both of them. Like just the fitment and the construction quality is just beyond reproach. So I would like to try out maybe a 3. I always wanted to buy their granites, and I was going to buy their granites for my sheep hunt. But the problem was they don't have toe and heel welds, which means you can't use clip-on crampons with the granites, and that's why I had to go with the La Sportiva Nepals for my goat hunt. So I would like to try something in a 3 just for those slightly more mountainous hunts, but I've used these boots extensively now. I had them for all 10 days of my elk hunt in the Northern Rockies this year. I had them in Alberta. I had them on a bear hunt. I've worn the shit out of them. I love them. I think they're for what they are, for the spot they fill in your closet. They are the perfect boot, in my opinion. So it's no surprise what I'm about to tell you in that for this gear shootout for the Schnee's Beartooth versus the Lathrop and Sons Mountain Hunter, the Schnee's Beartooth blows it out of the water. The one caveat I will say is that if the Mountain Hunter just naturally fit your foot, you didn't have to pay for any of the custom fitting process, and you were looking for a marginally stiffer boot than the Beartooths, it might be an acceptable option. But even if that was the case, I think there's better boots out there. Simply because the lower cuff, I don't like. The non-locking lacing hardware, I don't like. I find them they're just a bit of an odd shape as well. Anyways, I'm not gonna go on. That's essentially the review. If anybody has any questions, feel free to get a hold of me. Email j@mindfulhunter.com, Instagram mindful_hunter, YouTube mindful_hunter. You do me a big favor, like, comment, share, subscribe on whatever platform you're enjoying this. Let's fuck up the algorithm. It would be deeply appreciated. As always, I appreciate the support, and thanks for tuning in.